The scrap dealer's yellow eyes gleamed with greed as he gestured toward the corner of his cramped shop. Marcus Chun wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, squinting through the dim light at what looked like a pile of twisted metal and synthetic flesh. 3 credits. The Zolothian merchant hissed, his forked tongue darting between razor teeth. Take it or leave it, human. Nobody else wants that broken thing. Marcus knelt beside the creature, his weathered hands moving carefully over its scaled hide. The dragon was small for its species, barely the size of a hoverbike, with dulled silver scales that should have shimmered like starlight. One wing hung at an impossible angle, clearly shattered. Deep gouges ran along its flanks, and a thick collar around its neck blinked with the red light of a neural suppressor. What happened to it? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Dragon fighting had been outlawed in most civilized systems, but the underground circuits still thrived in places like Station Omega-7. The dealer shrugged his 4 arms dismissively. Fought in the pits on Zirian Prime. Lost too many times. Owner wanted it scrapped for parts, but the processing fee was more than it's worth. Been sitting here for 2 standard months now. Marcus's fingers found the pulse point beneath the dragon's jaw. Weak but steady, the creature's eyes remained closed, probably sedated to keep it docile. Dragons were proud beings, ancient and intelligent. To see one reduced to this state made something cold settle in Marcus's stomach. The neural suppressor, he said, pointing to the collar. How long has it been active? Since it arrived. Standard protocol for dangerous specimens. The dealer's laugh was more like a wheeze. Though this one's hardly dangerous anymore. Can't even lift its head without the dampening field. Marcus had worked with exotic alien technology for 15 years, ever since he'd left Earth's military engineering corps. He'd seen what neural suppressors did to sentient beings over extended periods. The psychological damage was often irreversible. Most creatures simply gave up, their minds retreating so far inward that they became little more than biological machines. But dragons were different. They were survivors. I'll take it, Marcus said, pulling 3 credit chips from his tool belt. The dealer's eyes widened slightly. You sure about that, human? No returns, no refunds. What you see is what you get. I'm sure. The transaction was completed with typical Zolothian efficiency. Marcus arranged for transport to his workshop on the station's lower levels, a cramped space he'd converted from an old cargo bay. The unconscious dragon was loaded onto a grav sled with all the care of freight cargo, which it essentially was now. An hour later, Marcus stood in his workshop, staring at the dragon lying on his main work table. The space around him was cluttered with the organized chaos of a master craftsman. Alien engine parts hung from the ceiling, their strange geometries casting odd shadows in the blue-white light of his work lamps. Tool kits from a dozen different species lined the walls, each designed for specific types of technology. The dragon looked smaller here, more fragile. Its breathing was shallow, but regular, and Marcus could see the slight tremor in its limbs that suggested dreams. Or nightmares. He'd repaired many things in his career. Quantum drives that had folded space incorrectly, biomechanical limbs torn off in industrial accidents, even a few AI cores that had suffered cascade failures. But he'd never worked on a living being before, especially not one with a soul. Marcus pulled up a holographic display from his workstation, accessing the Galactic Archive's biological databases. Dragon physiology was restricted information in most sectors, but his military clearance still granted him access to detailed anatomical data. He spent the next 3 hours studying bone structure, wing mechanics, and neurological pathways. The wing was the obvious problem. 3 primary flight bones were snapped clean through, and the membrane was torn in 17 different places. But that wasn't what worried him most. The neural suppressor was an older model, the kind that didn't just block higher brain functions, but actively scrambled them. If it had been active for 2 months, the dragon's mind might be too damaged to recover. Marcus reached for his neural interface headset, then hesitated. Dragons were telepathic to varying degrees, and attempting to make mental contact with an injured one was dangerous. Their psychic defenses, even damaged ones, could seriously harm an unprepared human mind. But he needed to know if anyone was still home inside that scaled head. The interface came alive as Marcus slipped it on, its quantum processors syncing with his brainwaves. He approached the dragon slowly, placing one hand on its forehead just above the neural suppressor. The metal was warm to the touch, humming with malevolent energy. Marcus closed his eyes and extended his consciousness toward the dragon's mind. The first thing he felt was pain. Not physical agony, though that was certainly present, but a deeper hurt that went to the core of what the dragon was. Images flashed through the connection. Bright arena lights, screaming crowds, the taste of blood and fear. The dragon had been young when it was captured, barely past adolescence by its species standards. But beneath the pain, Marcus sensed something else. A spark of defiance that the suppressors hadn't quite managed to extinguish. The dragon's true name whispered through their connection. Astherian, which meant starfire in the ancient dragon tongue. The mental contact lasted only seconds before Marcus pulled back, his head throbbing from the effort. But it was enough. Astherian was still fighting, still hoping for something better than the darkness of the suppressor's influence. Marcus looked at his tool collection, then at the broken dragon before him. He'd fixed impossible things before, but this would be his greatest challenge yet. Not just repairing a body, but helping heal a shattered spirit. "All right, Astherian," he whispered, reaching for his precision tools. "Let's see what we can do about getting you back in the sky." The first step was stabilizing the wing fractures. Marcus worked with the careful precision that had made him famous among the station's more discerning clients. Each bone fragment needed to be perfectly aligned before the biogel could begin its regenerative work. Dragons healed faster than most species, but only if the initial repair was done correctly. As he worked, Marcus found himself talking to the unconscious dragon, explaining each step of the process. It was something he'd always done with complex repairs, but this felt different, more personal. "The primary wing strut here, that's the tricky bit," he murmured, adjusting a micromanipulator to position a bone fragment. "Your people evolved these things over millions of years. Each piece has to carry exactly the right load, or the whole structure fails." The biogel was expensive, imported from the medical worlds of the Andromedan Alliance. Marcus had to use nearly his entire supply to patch the membrane tears, but watching the synthetic tissue slowly merge with Astherian's natural skin made it worth every credit. The real challenge would be the neural suppressor. Marcus had never attempted to remove one from a living subject, and the technical manuals were frustratingly vague about the procedure. One wrong move could cause permanent brain damage or even death. He spent another hour studying the device, tracing its connections to the dragon's nervous system. The suppressor had grown into Astherian's neural pathways like a technological parasite, its quantum processors interfacing directly with the brain's electrical patterns. Marcus's hands were steady as he reached for his most delicate tools. The suppressor would have to come off piece by piece, each component carefully disconnected to avoid triggering the device's defensive protocols. The first connection came free with a soft click, and Marcus felt a slight change in Astherian's breathing. Deeper, more natural. The second connection was trickier, requiring him to thread a microprobe through brain tissue to reach the interface point. By the time he'd removed the third component, Astherian's eyes began to flutter. Marcus paused, watching his consciousness slowly return to the dragon's golden gaze. There was confusion there, and fear, but also something that might have been hope. "Easy there," Marcus said softly, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "You're safe now. I'm going to get that collar off you, but I need you to stay still." Astherian's eyes focused on Marcus's face, studying him with an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient despite the dragon's young age. A low rumble came from deep in its chest, not quite a growl, but not exactly friendly either. The final connections were the most dangerous. These were the ones that directly interfaced with Astherian's pain centers and emotional regulators. Marcus's hands moved with surgical precision, each motion carefully planned and executed. When the last connection came free, the neural suppressor went dark with a dying electronic whine. Marcus caught the collar as it fell from Astherian's neck, setting it aside like the hateful thing it was. The change in the dragon was immediate and startling. Its eyes blazed with renewed fire, and when it tried to lift its head, the movement was strong and deliberate rather than the weak trembling of before. But then Astherian saw its bandaged wing and tried to spread it. The movement brought obvious pain, and the dragon's head fell back to the table with a sound that was almost like a sob. Marcus felt his heart break a little. "Hey, none of that now," he said, moving closer despite the fact that Astherian could probably bite his arm off if it wanted to. "The wing's going to heal. It'll take time, but you'll fly again. I promise." Astherian turned its great golden eyes toward Marcus, and for a moment, the human felt the full weight of the dragon's despair. This was a being born to soar between the stars, reduced to a broken thing on a repair table. The neural suppressor might be gone, but the psychological damage would take much longer to heal. Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He reached out slowly and placed his hand on Astherian's forehead, just as he had when making their first mental contact. "I know you understand me," he said quietly, "and I want you to know that I'm not going to sell you or trade you or put you in another fighting pit. You're free to go when you're healed, if that's what you want. But if you'd like to stay, I could use a partner. This station's full of broken things that need fixing, and some of them are bigger than I can handle alone." Astherian studied Marcus's face for a long moment, those ancient eyes seeming to peer directly into his soul. Then, slowly, the dragon lowered its head until its forehead was resting against Marcus's palm. The gesture was unmistakably one of trust, and Marcus felt something warm bloom in his chest. He'd found broken things before and made them whole again, but this was the first time one of his repairs had chosen to stay. Outside the workshop, Station Omega, 7 hummed with its usual chaos of trade and politics and barely controlled crime. But in this small corner of the universe, a human mechanic and a wounded dragon were beginning something that would eventually become legendary across a dozen star systems. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the moment when everything changed. 3 weeks later, Marcus was beginning to understand why dragons had once been considered gods by primitive civilizations. Astherian's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, but it was the dragon's intelligence that truly impressed him. Within days of the neural suppressor's removal, Astherian was not just understanding Marcus's repair work, but actively helping with suggestions. The dragon couldn't speak standard galactic yet, but their mental connection had grown stronger with each passing day. Astherian communicated through images and emotions, showing Marcus exactly what was wrong with complex machinery in ways that no diagnostic scanner could match. The dragon's natural affinity for energy patterns made him particularly gifted at spotting problems with quantum drives and plasma conduits. "Hand me the phase modulator," Marcus said, his head buried deep in the engine compartment of a Regelian transport ship. The small one with the blue housing. A warm presence touched his mind, and Marcus felt Astherian's gentle amusement. The dragon was perched on his repair table, his wings still wrapped, but much stronger now. Golden eyes watched Marcus work with the kind of focused attention that most people reserve for matters of life and death. The correct tool appeared beside Marcus's hand, lifted by Astherian's careful telekinetic touch. Dragons were naturally psionic, but Astherian's abilities had been severely damaged by the neural suppressor. They were slowly returning as his mind healed, starting with simple object manipulation and progressing to more complex skills. "Thanks, partner," Marcus said, fitting the modulator into place. The engine hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. Its quantum matrix finally stabilized after 2 days of troubleshooting. Through their mental link, Marcus felt Astherian satisfaction at another job well done. The dragon had taken to their partnership with an enthusiasm that was both touching and slightly surprising. Dragons were known for their independence, but Astherian seemed genuinely happy to have found a purpose beyond simple survival. The workshop's communication system chimed with an incoming message. Marcus wiped his hands clean and activated the holographic display, revealing the angular features of Commander Voss, head of station security. "Chun," Voss said without preamble, "I need to see you in my office. Bring your companion." The transmission cut off before Marcus could respond. He looked at Astherian, noting the way the dragon's eyes had narrowed at the mention of station security. After months in the fighting pits, Astherian had good reason to distrust authority figures. "Probably just routine," Marcus said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. Commander Voss wasn't known for social visits, and the man's expression had been unusually grim even by his standards. The security office was located in the station's administrative sector, a sterile maze of corridors that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the lower levels. Marcus and Astherian drew stares as they made their way through the area. A human walking beside a dragon was unusual enough, but one that wasn't collared or restrained was practically unheard of. Commander Voss was waiting behind his desk when they arrived, his scarred face displaying the kind of professional neutrality that usually meant trouble. Two other figures sat in chairs across from him, a well-dressed Centauran female with the bearing of nobility, and a massive Korvaxi warrior whose ceremonial armor marked him as a clan champion. "Mr. Chun," Voss said, gesturing to empty chairs. "Thank you for coming. Allow me to introduce Lady Zara of House Centauri and Champion Gorak of the Korvaxi clans." Marcus settled into a chair, while Astherian remained standing beside him. The dragon's presence was calm, but alert, golden eyes studying their visitors with careful attention. Lady Zara spoke first, her voice carrying the cultured tones of the Centauran aristocracy. "We understand you've recently acquired a dragon, Mr. Chun. A rather unusual transaction, given the creature's apparent condition." Astherian was legally purchased, Marcus replied carefully. "All documentation is on file with Station Commerce." "Oh, we're not questioning the legality of your acquisition," Champion Gorak rumbled, his voice like distant avalanches. "We're more interested in what you've done with the creature since then." Marcus felt a chill of premonition. "I'm a mechanic. I fix broken things. That includes living beings when necessary." Lady Zara leaned forward slightly. "Indeed, and your success in repairing this particular dragon has attracted considerable attention. You see, Mr. Chun, Astherian is not just any dragon. He's the last surviving member of the Stellar Wing lineage, a bloodline that was thought to have gone extinct during the Void Wars." The information hit Marcus like a plasma bolt. He glanced at Astherian, noting the way the dragon's head had tilted slightly, as if hearing something familiar. Through their mental link, Marcus caught images of other dragons, larger and more magnificent than any he'd seen in the archives. Astherian's memories of his family were fragmented, probably due to his young age when captured, but the emotional resonance was unmistakable. The Stellar Wings were known for their unique abilities, Champion Gorak continued. They could manipulate quantum fields directly, making them incredibly valuable for deep space exploration and combat operations. If this dragon truly carries that lineage, he's not for sale, Marcus said firmly. Lady Zara smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "We're not looking to purchase him, Mr. Chun. We're offering something far more valuable, a chance for Astherian to fulfill his true destiny." She activated a holographic projector, filling the air above the desk with the image of a massive space station. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, its architecture flowing and organic rather than the rigid geometric patterns favored by most species. "This is Sanctum Draconis," she said, the last remaining dragon preserved in known space. It's home to nearly 300 dragons of various subspecies, all living freely under the protection of an ancient treaty. They've agreed to accept Astherian as a member of their community. Marcus felt Astherian's interest spike through their mental connection, followed quickly by a wave of conflicted emotions. The dragon wanted to see others of his kind, but he was also reluctant to leave the life he'd built with Marcus. "What's the catch?" Marcus asked. Champion Gorak's laugh was like grinding stone. "Perceptive. There's indeed a condition. The preserve requires that Astherian demonstrate his worthiness according to dragon law. He must prove himself in ritual combat against 3 challengers of increasing difficulty." "Absolutely not," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "I didn't save him from one fighting pit just to throw him into another one." "This is different," Lady Zara said quickly. "Ritual combat among dragons is not to the death. It's a test of skill, courage, and honor. Astherian's lineage grants him the right to this trial, but only if he chooses to accept it." Marcus looked down at Astherian, who was studying the holographic image of the preserve with intense focus. Through their link, Marcus felt the dragon's longing for a place where he could truly belong, balanced against his loyalty to the human who had saved him. "How long would this trial take?" Marcus asked. "The combat trials are conducted over 3 days," Lady Zara replied. "But integration into the preserve community typically takes several months. If Astherian succeeds, he will be free to leave at any time, but most dragons choose to remain. And if he fails?" Champion Gorak's expression grew grave. "Failure in ritual combat results in exile from dragon society. He would be free to return here, but he would never again be welcomed among his own kind." The weight of the decision settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. This was Astherian's chance to reclaim his heritage, to be more than just a rescued fighting pit slave. But it was also a tremendous risk, and Marcus couldn't help but feel that he was being asked to choose between Astherian's happiness and his safety. Through their mental link, Astherian projected a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for Marcus's concern, determination to prove himself worthy, and a deep-seated need to understand what he truly was. The dragon had spent his entire conscious life being told he was worthless, a broken thing fit only for entertainment or scrap. The chance to discover his true heritage was worth almost any risk. "It has to be his choice," Marcus said finally. Lady Zara nodded. "Of course. Dragon law requires willing participation in the trials." Marcus knelt beside Astherian, placing a hand on the dragon's neck. Their mental connection deepened, allowing for more complex communication than simple images and emotions. "You don't have to do this," Marcus projected. "You have a place here, with me, for as long as you want it." Astherian's response was a mix of warmth and resolution. The dragon understood the risks, but also recognized that this might be his only chance to learn who he really was. The fighting pits had stolen his past, but they didn't have to define his future. "I need to try," Astherian projected back. "But I want you to come with me. You're part of my life now, Marcus. I don't want to face this alone." Marcus felt a surge of fierce pride. In 3 weeks, Astherian had gone from a broken slave to a being ready to reclaim his birthright. But he was also asking Marcus to trust him, to believe that their partnership was strong enough to survive whatever challenges lay ahead. "All right," Marcus said, looking up at Lady Zara, "we'll come to your preserve. But I go with him, and if I think the trials are anything other than fair and honorable, we leave immediately." Lady Zara's smile was more genuine this time. "Agreed. I think you'll find that dragon honor is not an empty phrase, Mr. Chun. When can you be ready to depart?" Marcus looked around the security office, then at Astherian. "How long will it take to reach this preserve?" 3 days by fast courier ship, Champion Gorak replied. "Then we'll need a week to prepare," Marcus said. "I have clients to notify and equipment to secure." But even as he made plans for their departure, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex than a simple trial by combat. The way Lady Zara and Champion Gorak had looked at Astherian suggested that the dragon's heritage was more significant than they were letting on. Through their mental link, Marcus felt Astherian's excitement building. The dragon was ready to face whatever challenges awaited him, confident in his abilities and secure in the knowledge that his human partner would be there to support him. Neither of them realized that their departure from Station Omega-7 was being watched by interested parties who had very different plans for the last of the stellar winged dragons. Plans that would make the ritual combat trials look like a friendly sparring match. The next morning, Marcus began making preparations for their journey. He contacted his regular clients, arranging for temporary coverage of their repair needs. Most were understanding, though a few grumbled about the inconvenience. Word of his partnership with Asterion had spread through the station's gossip networks, and his reputation had grown considerably as a result. Asterion's wing was nearly healed now, strong enough for short flights within the workshop, but not yet ready for the demands of deep space travel. The dragon spent hours each day exercising, rebuilding muscle tone, and testing his reflexes. His telekinetic abilities had also continued to improve, and he could now manipulate objects with impressive precision. On their final day at the station, Marcus was packing his essential tools when Asterion suddenly went rigid, his eyes fixed on the workshop's main entrance. A moment later, Marcus heard footsteps in the corridor outside. The door slid open to reveal a figure in dark robes, its face hidden beneath a deep hood. Marcus reached for the plasma welder he kept within easy reach, but Asterion stepped protectively in front of him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Peace, young dragon," the figure said, pulling back its hood to reveal the weathered features of an elderly human female. "I mean neither of you harm. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I have information you need before you undertake this trial." Marcus kept the welder ready, but didn't activate it. "What kind of information?" Dr. Vasquez stepped fully into the workshop, her eyes immediately going to Asterion. "Information about what really happened to the Stellar Wing lineage, and why certain parties are so interested in seeing this dragon participate in ritual combat." The gravity in her voice made Marcus's blood run cold. He looked at Asterion, noting the way the dragon's eyes had narrowed with suspicion. "Start talking," Marcus said. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through Marcus's workshop with the confident steps of someone accustomed to being around dangerous machinery. Her eyes took in the various alien technologies hanging from the ceiling and lining the walls, but her attention kept returning to Asterion. 40 years ago, I was the chief xenobiologist for the Galactic Council's Dragon Research Division," she began, settling into the only chair not covered with spare parts. "I was part of the team that first documented the stellar wing abilities, and I was there when the last known family was captured." Marcus felt Asterion's sudden spike of interest through their mental connection. The dragon moved closer to Dr. Vasquez, golden eyes fixed intently on her face. "The official records state that the stellar wings went extinct during the Void Wars," Dr. Vasquez continued. "But that's only partially true. They were hunted to near extinction by parties who wanted to weaponize their quantum field manipulation abilities." She activated a small holographic projector, filling the air with the image of a dragon unlike any Marcus had seen. It was larger than Asterion, with scales that seemed to shift between silver and deep blue. Most striking were its eyes, which glowed with an inner light that suggested vast intelligence and power. "This was Asterion's father, Kirathon the Star Weaver," Dr. Vasquez said softly. "He was the most powerful dragon of his generation, capable of folding space-time on a scale that made him invaluable for deep space exploration. He could open quantum tunnels that allowed instantaneous travel between star systems." Through their mental link, Marcus felt Asterion's shock and recognition. Fragmented memories were surfacing, images of the great dragon in the hologram, mixed with sensations of safety and warmth. The hegemony wanted to capture him, to use his abilities for military purposes. Dr. Vasquez continued. When Kirathon refused to cooperate, they began hunting his entire bloodline. They believed that his offspring might inherit his powers. Marcus's blood ran cold as the implications sank in, and now they think Asterion might have inherited those abilities. "More than think," Dr. Vasquez said grimly. "No, the quantum field manipulations you've been witnessing during his healing process are just the beginning. As Asterion matures and his powers fully develop, he could potentially become more powerful than his father ever was. The hologram shifted, showing technical readouts and energy signatures that meant nothing to Marcus, but clearly fascinated Astherion. The dragon was studying the data with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for complex repair work. The so-called ritual combat trials are a trap, Dr. Vasquez said. Lady Zara and Champion Gorak work for a shadow organization that wants to study Astherion's abilities. The preserve is real, but it's also a prison. Dragons who enter rarely leave. Marcus stood abruptly, anger flaring in his chest. Then, we're not going. But Astherion's reaction surprised him. Instead of relief or agreement, Marcus felt determination flowing through their mental connection. The dragon was still studying the holographic data, and something in those energy patterns had sparked a deep recognition. Through their link, Astherion projected complex concepts that Marcus struggled to understand. The dragon had been having dreams since his healing began, visions of other dragons, and vast spaces between stars. He dismissed them as fantasies born from his fragmented memories, but now he realized they might be something more. He wants to go anyway, Marcus said, interpreting Astherion's emotions, even knowing it's a trap. Dr. Vasquez nodded sadly. I thought he might. Dragons have a powerful need to understand their heritage, and Astherion has been denied that knowledge his entire life. The chance to learn about his father's legacy might be worth any risk to him. There has to be another way, Marcus said. Some way for him to learn about his abilities without walking into a trap. Perhaps there is, Dr. Vasquez said carefully. But it would require you to trust me completely, and it would be far more dangerous than any ritual combat. She deactivated the hologram and leaned forward in her chair. The Hegemony isn't the only group interested in stellar winged dragons. There's also the Void Covenant, a collection of species who believe that quantum field manipulation represents the next step in galactic evolution. They've been searching for a stellar wing for decades, hoping to study their abilities and potentially replicate them. Marcus felt his frustration growing. So Astherion's caught between two different groups that want to use him. Not exactly, Dr. Vasquez said with a slight smile. The Void Covenant doesn't want to capture him. They want to teach him. Their philosophy is based on willing partnership rather than forced servitude. She activated her projector again, this time showing an image of a massive ship unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Its hull seemed to be made of crystalline material that pulsed with internal light, and its shape defied conventional engineering principles. This is the Nexus, the Void Covenant's mobile research station, Dr. Vasquez said. It's crewed by beings from 17 different species, all working together to understand the deepest mysteries of the universe. They have resources and knowledge that could help Astherion develop his abilities safely. And what do they want in return? Marcus asked suspiciously. Knowledge, Dr. Vasquez replied simply. They want to study how stellar wing abilities work, but they believe such study can only be effective with willing participation. They would teach Astherion to use his powers in exchange for the opportunity to learn from him. Through their mental connection, Marcus felt Astherion's growing excitement. The dragon had always been driven by curiosity and a desire to understand how things worked. The idea of learning about his own abilities while helping others expand their knowledge appealed to him on a fundamental level. How do we contact them? Marcus asked. Dr. Vasquez smiled for the first time since entering the workshop. We don't. They contact us. The Nexus has been monitoring Hegemony communications, and they know about the supposed ritual trials. They're planning to intercept your transport ship and offer you an alternative. That sounds almost as dangerous as the original plan, Marcus pointed out. Perhaps. But the Void Covenant has something the Hegemony doesn't. They genuinely want to see Astherion thrive rather than simply exploit his abilities. Marcus looked at Astherion, noting the way the dragon's eyes had begun to glow with an inner light that reminded him of the hologram of Kirathon. Through their mental connection, he felt a complex mix of determination, excitement, and, yes, fear. But it was the kind of fear that came with facing a great challenge rather than the terrified hopelessness he'd sensed when first removing the neural suppressor. If we do this, Marcus said slowly, we do it together. No separation, no matter what these Void Covenant people want to study. Astherian's response was immediate and warm. The dragon had no intention of leaving his human partner behind, regardless of what opportunities might be offered. They had become a team, and teams stayed together. I think that can be arranged, Dr. Vasquez said. The Covenant values partnership bonds, especially unusual ones. A human-dragon team would be something they'd want to study as much as Astherian's quantum abilities. The next few hours were spent in detailed planning. Dr. Vasquez provided Marcus with encrypted communication codes and detailed information about the Void Covenant's protocols. She also gave him a small device that would signal their willingness to be contacted when the time came. One more thing, she said as she prepared to leave. The neural suppressor damage wasn't entirely psychological. It may have actually enhanced certain aspects of Astherian's natural abilities by forcing his brain to develop alternative neural pathways. His telekinetic precision and his ability to interface directly with quantum fields may be far beyond what's normal even for a stellar wing. Marcus felt Astherian's surprise through their mental link. The dragon had noticed that his abilities seemed stronger than the archived record suggested, but he'd attributed that to wishful thinking rather than genuine enhancement. So the bastards who tortured him accidentally made him more powerful. Marcus asked. Ironic, isn't it? Dr. Vasquez replied. The very attempts to break his spirit may have unlocked potentials that would have taken decades to develop naturally. After she left, Marcus and Astherian spent the evening going through their preparations one final time. The workshop felt strange and empty with most of his equipment packed away, like a home preparing for a long journey. You sure about this? Marcus asked as they settled down for what might be their last night on Station Omega-7. Astherian's response came as a warm wave of certainty mixed with deep affection. The dragon was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they would face them together. The next morning brought Lady Zara and Champion Gorak, along with a small retinue of attendants and guards. They seemed pleased that Marcus and Astherian were ready to depart, though Marcus noticed the way their eyes lingered on Astherian with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The transport ship was a sleek Centauran courier vessel, its hull gleaming with the kind of expensive finish that spoke of serious money behind the operation. Marcus and Astherian were shown to comfortable quarters in the ship's passenger section, while their escort settled into the command areas. As the ship undocked from Station Omega-7 and began its journey into deep space, Marcus activated Dr. Vasquez's communication device. A single pulse of quantum energy shot out from the device, too brief and subtle to be detected by the ship's sensors, but carrying a message that would eventually reach the Nexus. Through the viewport in their quarters, Marcus watched the stars shift into the familiar lines of faster-than-light travel. Somewhere out there, the Void Covenant was moving to intercept them. In less than 3 days, they would face a choice that would determine not just Astherian's future, but possibly the future of dragon-human cooperation throughout the galaxy. Astherian settled beside Marcus, his golden eyes reflecting the star trails outside their window. Through their mental connection, Marcus felt the dragon's excitement building. For the first time since his capture as a hatchling, Astherian was moving toward a future of his own, choosing rather than one imposed upon him by others. Neither of them slept much that first night in hyperspace. They were too busy planning for the challenges ahead and wondering what the Void Covenant would be like. But beneath the uncertainty, there was also hope. They had found each other against impossible odds, and together they had already achieved things that neither could have accomplished alone. The real test of their partnership was still to come, but Marcus found himself looking forward to it with anticipation rather than fear. Whatever the future held, they would face it as equals, as friends, and as family. The stars streamed past their window like rivers of light, carrying them toward a destiny that would reshape their understanding of what was possible when two very different beings chose to trust each other completely. The attack came during the second day of their journey, when the courier ship was deep in the space between star systems where no help could possibly arrive in time. Marcus was in their quarters calibrating some of his more sensitive tools when the ship's emergency klaxons began blaring. Through his mental link with Asterion, Marcus felt the dragon's sudden alertness. Asterion's head had snapped up from where he'd been resting, golden eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. "Unknown vessel has dropped out of hyperspace directly ahead," came Lady Zara's voice over the ship's communication system. "All passengers remain in quarters until further notice." Marcus moved to the viewport, peering out into the star-filled darkness. At first he saw nothing unusual, but then space itself seemed to ripple, and a ship materialized as if it had been woven from the fabric of reality itself. The Nexus was even more impressive in person than it had been in Dr. Vasquez's hologram. Its crystalline hull caught and reflected starlight in patterns that seemed almost organic, and energy coursed through its structure in ways that defied conventional understanding of how starships were supposed to work. "That's them," Marcus said, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "The Void Covenant." Asterion moved to stand beside him at the viewport, and Marcus felt the dragons awe through their mental connection. There was something about the Nexus that resonated with Asterion on a level deeper than simple visual appreciation. The ship's energy patterns were familiar somehow, like seeing a reflection of something he'd always known but never been able to name. The communication system crackled to life again, but this time the voice was unfamiliar, carrying harmonics that suggested it belonged to someone who wasn't entirely human. "Centauran vessel. This is Coordinator Vex of the Nexus. We request immediate transport of passengers Marcus Chun and the Dragon Asterion to our ship. They are traveling under false pretenses and are in considerable danger." Lady Zara's response was swift and sharp. "Unknown vessel. You're interfering with a lawful transport. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The consequences of refusing to surrender beings who are traveling to what amounts to imprisonment, Coordinator Vex replied, and now Marcus could hear the steel beneath the polite words. "We think not." What followed was a brief but intense standoff. The courier ship's weapons powered up, their energy signatures visible as sudden flares of light against the Nexus's hull. But the crystalline ship's response was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Instead of returning fire, the Nexus simply dissolved the incoming energy. The plasma bolts and particle beams struck its hull and were absorbed, converted into a harmless light that played across the crystal surface like aurora. "Impressive," Champion Gorak's voice rumbled over the communication system. "But we have something you want, and our ship has advantages you may not have considered." To Marcus's horror, he felt the artificial gravity in their quarters suddenly intensify. The increased pressure pressed him to the floor, and he could see Asterion struggling against the same effect. Through their mental link, he felt the dragon's pain and growing anger. "Release the excessive gravity," Champion Coordinator Vex said, and now there was definitely threat in those harmonious tones. "You are harming a being under our protection." "Then come aboard and take him," Champion Gorak replied. "If you can." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Asterion had apparently decided he'd had enough of being treated like cargo. Marcus felt the dragon's fury building through their mental connection, a cold rage that was far more dangerous than any hot-blooded anger. Golden light began to emanate from Asterion's eyes, and Marcus suddenly felt the artificial gravity around them fluctuate wildly. The dragon was somehow interfacing directly with the ship's systems, using abilities that Marcus hadn't even known he possessed. The gravity normalized abruptly, and alarms began sounding throughout the courier ship. Through the viewport, Marcus could see energy discharges running along the vessel's hull as various systems began to malfunction. Fascinating, came Coordinator Vex's voice, now clearly impressed. Direct quantum field manipulation of artificial gravity generators. We definitely need to talk. What happened next was so fast that Marcus almost missed it. The Nexus extended what looked like a crystalline bridge through space itself, the structure forming from concentrated energy and exotic matter. The bridge touched the courier ship's hull, and Marcus felt a gentle tugging sensation as some kind of transport beam took hold of both him and Astherian. No! Lady Zara's voice cracked with desperation. The hegemony will pay triple the standard rate for delivery. But her protest came too late. Marcus felt the familiar disorientation of matter transportation, and when his vision cleared, he was standing in what could only be the Nexus's main reception area. The space around them defied easy description. The walls seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as the ship's hull, but they pulsed with internal light that created patterns of almost hypnotic beauty. The ceiling was transparent, offering a view of the stars that made Marcus feel as though he were floating in space itself. But it was the beings who had greeted them that truly captured his attention. Coordinator Vex was clearly the leader, a tall figure whose humanoid form was augmented with technological implants that seemed to be organic rather than mechanical. Their skin had a faint luminescence, and their eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence and experience. Beside them stood creatures that Marcus recognized from the Galactic archives, but had never seen in person. Aetherian, with its flowing, gaseous form contained within a translucent environmental suit. A Zephyrian whose crystalline body refracted light in patterns that were almost musical. And at least a dozen other species, all watching Astherian with expressions of respectful curiosity. "Welcome aboard the Nexus," Coordinator Vex said, their voice now clearly audible without the distortion of ship communications. "I am Vex, and we are honored to finally meet a stellar winged dragon." Astherian stepped forward, his movements graceful despite his recent ordeal. Marcus felt the dragon's wariness through their mental link, but also his genuine curiosity about these beings who seemed to regard him as something more than a valuable specimen. "I am Astherian," the dragon said, and Marcus started with surprise. It was the first time he'd heard Astherian speak aloud in Standard Galactic, though their mental communication had been growing more sophisticated for weeks. "And I am Marcus Chun," Marcus added, moving to stand beside his partner. "We appreciate the rescue, but we'd like to understand what you want from us." Vex's expression, insofar as Marcus could read it, seemed approving. Direct and honest. Excellent qualities. "What we want, Mr. Chun, is to offer Astherian the education that is his birthright as a stellar wing, while learning from him in return. But only if he chooses to accept our offer." The Etherian drifted closer, its voice coming from speakers integrated into its environmental suit. "We have studied the quantum field manipulation techniques of 17 different species, but none approach the elegance and power of the stellar wing methods. We hope to understand not just how these abilities work, but why they developed in dragons specifically." "And what do we get in return?" Marcus asked. "Knowledge," the Zephyrian replied, its crystalline form resonating with harmonious tones. "We will teach Astherian to fully develop his inherited abilities, and we will share with you both the accumulated wisdom of our member species. This includes technologies and techniques that could revolutionize your understanding of the universe." Through their mental link, Marcus felt Astherian's growing excitement. The dragon had always been driven by curiosity and a desire to understand how things worked. The opportunity to learn about his own heritage while expanding his knowledge of galactic civilization was almost irresistibly appealing. "What about the hegemony?" Marcus asked. "They're not going to just give up on capturing him." Coordinator Vex's expression grew grim. "The hegemony has been hunting stellar wings for decades, but they've never been able to capture one who was both powerful and free to make their own choices. Their usual method involves taking young dragons before their abilities fully develop, then using neural suppressors to control them, which explains why they were so interested in Astherion. Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. They thought they could control him because of his history in the fighting pits. Precisely. But they failed to account for two crucial factors: your intervention in healing both his body and his spirit, and the possibility that the neural suppressor might have actually enhanced rather than diminished his natural abilities. Astherion moved closer to the group of alien scientists, his golden eyes studying each of them with careful attention. Through their mental link, Marcus felt the dragon making assessments of their character and intentions with the same precision he brought to analyzing complex machinery. After several minutes, Astherion turned back to Marcus, and their mental connection deepened to allow for more complex communication than usual. These beings are genuine in their desire to learn and teach, Astherion projected. I can sense no deception in them, no hidden agenda beyond what they've stated openly. Are you sure about this? Marcus responded. Once we commit to this path, there's no going back to the simple life we had on the station. Was that life ever really an option for me in the long term? Astherion asked. The hegemony would have found me eventually, and without understanding my true capabilities, I would have been helpless against them. Marcus felt the truth in that observation. Astherion's growing powers would have attracted attention sooner or later, and it was better to face that attention with allies and knowledge rather than hiding in ignorance. All right, Marcus said aloud. We'll accept your offer, but we come as a team. Whatever you want to study or teach, we do it together. Coordinator Vex's face lit up with what Marcus was learning to recognize as a smile. Excellent. We were hoping you would say that. The bond between you and Astherion is almost as fascinating to us as his quantum abilities. We've never encountered such a deep partnership between a human and a dragon. How long will this education take? Marcus asked. That depends largely on Astherion's natural learning rate and the extent of his inherited abilities, the Etherian replied. But we estimate several months at minimum, possibly as long as 2 years for complete mastery. Through their mental link, Marcus felt Astherion's mixture of anticipation and determination. The dragon was ready to commit to whatever training was necessary to understand his heritage and develop his full potential. Then, let's get started, Marcus said. What followed was a whirlwind introduction to the Nexus and its remarkable crew. The ship was less a vessel than a mobile research institute, with laboratories and training facilities that could accommodate the needs of dozens of different species. Marcus was given access to workshops equipped with technologies he'd only dreamed of, while Astherion began preliminary sessions with specialists in quantum field theory and psionic development. The first real test came 3 days later, when long-range sensors detected a hegemony battle fleet moving to intercept them. Lady Zara had apparently been more connected than they'd realized, and news of Astherion's rescue had reached the highest levels of the organization. They're sending 12 capital ships, Coordinator Vex reported during an emergency briefing. More firepower than we can reasonably hope to fight directly. Then we run, Marcus said. Not an option, the Zephyrian replied. They have faster ships and better navigation systems. They'll catch us within hours. Astherion, who had been quietly listening to the discussion, suddenly stepped forward. What if we don't run? Astherion, Marcus said warningly. These aren't fighting pit opponents. They have weapons that could destroy this entire ship. But they can't use those weapons if they can't find us, Astherion replied. And through their mental link, Marcus felt the dragon's growing excitement as a plan began to form. What are you thinking? Coordinator Vex asked. Astherion's eyes began to glow with golden light, and Marcus felt quantum energies gathering around his partner with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. I'm thinking it's time to see what a stellar wing can really do. The Nexus's main laboratory had been hastily converted into a command center, its crystalline walls now displaying tactical information about the approaching hegemony fleet. Marcus stood beside Astherion at the center of the room, surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in known space, all focused on a problem that seemed impossible to solve. 12 capital ships in standard attack formation, Coordinator Vex announced, studying the sensor displays. They'll be in weapons range within 37 minutes. Our shields can handle maybe 3 ships' worth of concentrated fire, the Aetherian added, its gaseous form swirling with agitation. Against 12, we'll be overwhelmed in minutes. Marcus felt Astherion's calm confidence through their mental link, a steady warmth that contrasted sharply with the growing tension in the room. The dragon was studying the tactical display with the same focused attention he brought to analyzing complex machinery, but there was something different in his posture now, a sense of power held in careful control. "Show me the quantum field readings around the fleet," Astherion said quietly. The Zephyrion's crystalline form chimed softly as it manipulated the display controls. "Here, standard hyperspace wake distortions, residual energy from their faster-than-light drives. Nothing unusual, except that they're moving in perfect formation," Astherion observed, "which means their navigation systems are synchronized through quantum entanglement communicators." Understanding began to dawn on Marcus's face. "You want to interfere with their communications?" "More than that," Astherion replied, his golden eyes beginning to glow with inner light. "I want to show them why hunting dragons is a bad idea." The dragon moved to the center of the laboratory, settling into a meditative posture that Marcus had seen him use during his most complex repair work. But this time, the energy gathering around Astherion was unlike anything Marcus had witnessed before. Through their mental link, Marcus felt his partner reaching out with senses that existed beyond normal physical perception. Astherion was touching the quantum field that connected all things, feeling the flow of energy between the stars themselves. "Remarkable," Coordinator Vex whispered, checking instrument readings that were climbing into ranges Marcus had never seen before. "He's accessing quantum layers that most beings can't even detect." The space around Astherion began to shimmer like heat haze, and Marcus felt reality itself seemed to bend in response to the dragon's will. Through their connection, he caught glimpses of what Astherion was perceiving. Vast networks of energy that connected every particle in the universe, streams of force that could be redirected and reshaped by a mind that understood their true nature. "Astherion," Marcus said softly, placing a hand on his partner's neck. "Are you sure about this?" The dragon's response came as a wave of absolute certainty mixed with fierce joy. For the first time since his capture as a hatchling, Astherion was about to use the abilities he'd been born to wield. Not for entertainment or destruction, but to protect the beings who had shown him kindness and respect. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace 28 minutes later, their massive ships bristling with weapons and shielded by energy barriers that could withstand the firepower of entire planetary defense systems. On the bridge of the lead vessel, Admiral Corex smiled coldly as he surveyed the single alien ship that represented his prey. "All ships, target the crystalline vessel," he ordered. "I want that dragon taken alive, but I don't particularly care what condition it's in." The fleet began its attack approach, weapons charging, and targeting systems locking onto the Nexus. But as they moved into optimal firing range, something impossible began to happen. Space itself started to fold. The quantum field around the hegemony fleet twisted and warped as Astherion reached across the vast distance between them and grasped the fundamental forces that held their ships together. The dragon wasn't attacking the vessels directly. Instead, he was manipulating the space-time continuum around them. "What's happening?" Admiral Corex demanded as his ship's navigation systems began displaying readings that made no sense. According to the instruments, they were simultaneously moving forward and backward while also existing in 17 different locations at once. "Unknown quantum interference," his science officer reported. "Something is manipulating the space-time matrix directly." On the Nexus, Marcus watched in awe as Astherion wove impossibilities with the casual ease of an artist painting with light. The dragon's consciousness was spread across light years, touching each enemy ship and gently convincing the universe that they weren't quite where they thought they were. He's creating a localized maze in space-time, the Zephyrian observed, its crystalline form resonating with harmonics of pure amazement. Each ship thinks it's moving toward us, but they're actually traveling in circles through folded space. The hegemony fleet found itself trapped in a pocket of twisted reality where the normal laws of physics had been politely, but firmly set aside. Their weapons fired at targets that weren't there, their engines pushed them toward destinations that kept moving, and their sensors reported a universe that had suddenly become far more interesting than anyone had planned for. But Asterion wasn't finished. Through their mental link, Marcus felt his partner reaching deeper into the quantum field, touching energies that existed at the very foundation of reality. The dragon was accessing abilities that even he hadn't known he possessed, powers that were awakening in response to genuine need and moral purpose. "He's opening a quantum tunnel," Coordinator Vex said, his voice filled with professional awe. "Not just bending space, but actually creating a pathway through higher dimensional layers." The crystalline walls of the Nexus became transparent, revealing a view of stars that suddenly began to flow past them at impossible speeds. But they weren't moving through normal space. They were traveling through a corridor that Asterion had carved through the quantum foam itself. The journey that should have taken weeks was completed in minutes. When the tunnel collapsed behind them, the Nexus was floating in the outer system of a star that wasn't even on most navigation charts. The hegemony fleet was thousands of light years away, probably still trying to figure out what had happened to them. Asterion swayed slightly as the effort of maintaining the quantum manipulation took its toll, but Marcus was there to steady him. Through their mental link, he felt the dragon's exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. Asterion had finally understood what he truly was, what his heritage meant, and what he was capable of when his abilities were properly focused. "That was incredible," the Etherian said, its gaseous form still swirling with excitement. "We've never seen quantum field manipulation on that scale performed by a single being. Is this normal for stellar wings?" Marcus asked. Coordinator Vex was studying sensor readings that were still climbing down from the extraordinary levels they'd reached during Astherion's demonstration. "According to our historical records, mature stellar wings could indeed manipulate space-time on this scale. But Asterion isn't mature yet. His abilities are still developing." Marcus felt a chill at the implications. If this was what Asterion could do while still learning to use his powers, what would he be capable of when he reached full maturity? Through their mental connection, Asterion projected feelings of deep satisfaction mixed with a new understanding of his place in the universe. He was no longer the broken slave from the fighting pits, or even the rescued dragon being protected by a kind mechanic. He was something far more significant, the heir to a legacy of power that could reshape the galaxy itself. But with that understanding came responsibility. The abilities that could open pathways between stars could also be used to destroy entire worlds. The power to bend space-time was not something to be wielded lightly or for personal gain. "I need to learn control," Asterion said aloud, his voice carrying new depths of maturity. "These abilities, they're more dangerous than I realized." "That's why we're here," Coordinator Vex replied. "To help you understand not just how to use your powers, but when and why to use them." The Void Covenant has spent centuries studying the ethical implications of cosmic-level abilities. Over the following months, Marcus watched his partner grow into something magnificent. Under the careful guidance of the Nexus's specialists, Asterion learned to control and refine his quantum manipulation abilities. He discovered that he could not only fold space for travel, but also reinforce the fundamental forces that held matter together, making him incredibly valuable for large-scale engineering projects. Marcus himself wasn't idle during this time. The workshops of the Nexus provided him with access to technologies that revolutionized his understanding of mechanical systems. He learned to work with materials and energy sources that existed at the intersection of science and art, creating tools and devices that would have been considered magic on any world he'd known before. But the most important development was the deepening of their partnership. As Astherian's abilities grew, so did their mental connection. They became not just allies, but true partners, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for their weaknesses. The hegemony continued to search for them, but the Nexus was now beyond their reach. Astherian's mastery of quantum travel made it possible for the ship to appear anywhere in the galaxy within moments, studying cosmic phenomena and helping other species understand the deeper mysteries of existence. They visited worlds where reality itself was under threat from dimensional incursions, and Astherian learned to weave space-time into defensive barriers that protected entire civilizations. They explored the remains of ancient technologies that predated current galactic civilization, with Marcus's engineering skills and Astherian's quantum senses working together to unlock secrets that had been lost for millions of years. But perhaps most importantly, they proved that the partnership between humans and dragons could be something extraordinary. Other surviving dragons began to seek them out, drawn by stories of the Stellar Wing who had reclaimed his heritage and the human mechanic who had helped him do it. A year after their escape from the hegemony fleet, Marcus and Astherian stood on the observation deck of the Nexus, watching a binary star system perform its ancient dance of light and gravity. Astherian's scales now shimmered with the inner radiance that marked a dragon who had come into his full power, and Marcus wore the confident bearing of someone who had found his true calling. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, thinking of the simple life they'd left behind on Station Omega-7. Astherian's response came through their mental link as a wave of contentment and affection. The dragon had no desire to return to hiding in repair shops, when he could be exploring the fundamental nature of reality itself. "None at all," Astherian said aloud. "Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't paid those 3 credits for a worthless dragon." Marcus smiled, remembering that first meeting in the scrap dealer's shop. It seemed like a lifetime ago, when in reality it had been the beginning of an adventure that was still unfolding. "You were never worthless," he said firmly. "You were just waiting for someone to see what you really were." As if in response to his words, Astherian spread his wings, their span now magnificent enough to cast shadows across half the observation deck. The dragon's eyes blazed with golden fire as he reached out with quantum senses that could touch the edge of the galaxy, feeling the pulse of cosmic forces that sang of infinite possibility. Together, they had proven that even the most broken things could be made whole again, and that the bond between two very different beings could become strong enough to reshape the universe itself. The hegemony still searched for them, but they were no longer hiding. They were exploring, learning, and building a future where dragons and humans could work together as equals. And somewhere in the space between stars, that future was already beginning to take shape.